Hello, hello. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to be up here. And this is my first Next event, so I found it very, very interesting thus far. A little bit about me and what we're going to talk about today is integrated analytics at the market level. We're going to talk about AI, and we're going to talk about pragmatic use of AI to actually accomplish things, less about theory. So my background is I'm a technologist. When I was a kid, I thought I wanted to design video games for a living, because that seemed to be what one would do when they were a kid, and that was going to be my career. And then as I started through my professional life, what I really found intriguing was not technology for technology's sake, like when I was younger, but how technology actually makes a difference and changes things. So I kind of consider myself an applied technologist. If I was a physicist, I'd be an applied physicist, not like a theoretical physicist. But that's how I think about things. And within 3, if you're not familiar with our company, we do a couple of things, really. What we do is we have technology and service to help organizations gather insights and information and knowledge from customers. And then we have a set of capabilities to help kind of analyze and understand all of that. And it's the latter that I'm going to talk about today. So how do you know from a marketing or market point of view if your strategy is working? And if we were going to take a poll across folks and say, what do you look at? What do you measure? How do you know, depending on the therapy, the region? I think the answer is it can be complicated, and it can differ. And AI can play a role here. And so what I want to talk about is AI in this context specifically. So in some of the panels earlier, there was discussion around AI is kind of in that place in the hype cycle where people have like an AI department or an AI strategy. And the way I think we should think about that is certainly around a problem we're solving with AI as part of the solution, as opposed to AI being an end unto itself. And I think at least I find when I come to different conferences and when I speak, there's what's really interesting, the vision and where we're going to be in 5 years or 10 years is kind of intellectually interesting, but what's really cool is when you see actual examples of folks doing things, or people are talking about actual examples of how their lives are being easier, faster, achieving their goals better. That's the exciting part. And so the way to think about AI is depending on the problem you're solving, the AI needs to behave differently. And that's kind of where the expertise comes in. If you are doing something like you're reading medical records and you're trying to decide if a patient qualifies for something or should be receiving some sort of treatment, the level of accuracy you need there is quite different than if you're doing AI internally to summarize meeting notes, like they were talking about in the last panel. So things like accuracy, the knowledge of the AI, the workflow that's built into it, depending on what you're solving, all of that kind of goes into the pot, into the soup, and then you evaluate whether or not that's going to work. So that's how we think about the solutions that we build. We think about, if I'm affecting a process, if everything was magically wonderful, could we eliminate at least 90% of the workload that's being done today as an efficiency metric? And if the answer is probably not, then there's probably other more important problems to solve. But it's very much like a pragmatic sort of thinking. So what we're going to talk about is AI in the context of insights and kind of market strategy level reporting. So I'm going to start off and talk about what we mean by an insight. Because that's a word I have found, at least in my travels, has a couple of different meanings. There's insight at, if you think of this tree behind me, let's say the tree is a HCP. There's insight at the HCP level. I have an omni-channel plan. I understand this HCP's preferences. I can see what interactions have happened with this HCP. I may be getting ready to call on this person. The system may be generating recommendations for me, things that you all know really, really well, and there's a lot of technology and system there. So insight at that level is insight at kind of the tree in the forest. And then there's insight at the forest level. So I have a strategy as a therapy. There's things about my therapy that are different than the current standard of care. My goal is to make sure that the right customers understand this, know about this. Maybe I need to influence guidelines in some way or our market access organizations. Maybe I need to expand out my patient journey and understand different opportunities where people are underserved. Everyone's strategy has different kind of pillars to it from a marketing point of view. And how do we understand that landscape to know is a strategy working, basically? And when you look at the data that is available, the traditional way is things like, I might do a market research, like ATU studies over time to kind of see if this is working on a particular segment of my strategy. But in the real world, in today's world, we are inundated with data. And all of this different data is a piece of the market. It can be used in different ways, in theory, right, to understand different aspects of the market, to have a better, more real-time view on, is my strategy working and what's changing over time? And this is just a subset, right? There's too much data in some ways. And that's actually what we see. So Reuters did a survey earlier this year, a global survey. And what I found really interesting is the top left, 40% of folks, the largest percentage of folks commenting on this data issue, 40% said, we don't have enough data to make good decisions. And then the very next one was like 35% said, we have too much data. And so people are kind of in that mode of there's data, they're kind of drowning in it. Bias comes up a lot as well. Are we hearing what we want to hear from certain sources versus are we getting objective information about what's different or what we don't expect or what we should be doing? And so there's this consistent issue of, at the market level, there's a kind of a fuzziness that exists that can be difficult to measure. So in a perfect world, you would have a system that is backed by AI that could understand your market strategies, analyze a bunch of data, run it through AI models, and help you understand the market and report on it and so forth. And so this is one of the areas where companies like us and others are investing, and organizations internally are investing to try to solve this specific problem, which is kind of that overall market strategy analysis as opposed to insights at the individual level. So how well does AI handle this sort of work today? And so this is kind of a way that to think about, for this type of work, where is AI? What's the current standard in terms of its effectiveness? So the first thing is, and what you're dealing with here is analyzing data and making judgments and relating it back to your strategy. So this is a sort of environment where there is always going to be a human and human expertise needed. And so when you're building a solution for this sort of problem, you're trying to build a solution that augments the human and makes the human more effective and saves the human time, as opposed to trying to build a solution to kind of replace the human or automate the human out of the process. And when you think about the different criteria for how well this needs to work, there's how good are the recommendations, the next best actions, the insights. It's one thing to summarize something like a ChatGPT will do. It's another thing to look at a wide data set and say, what's the so what out of this data that might reflect on a strategy? So how well it does that, how much time it saves, how well the reporting, the communication of what it's learning, and then finally, what data can it handle? So those are kind of some ways to judge these solutions. So we started working on this in the 2019, 2018 sort of time frame, kind of pre-Gen AI, and then Gen AI kind of came onto the scene. But a lot of organizations use what I call dashboard AI, which is very like predictive. We're measuring this, it's going up and down. It's not telling me anything. Someone has to look at the dashboard to say, aha, this is going wrong, is what I understand from the dashboard, so let me react to it, as opposed to the system saying, this is going wrong, you should do something different. And then what I call consumer Gen AI is used a lot as well, which is an analyst, kind of maybe there's a ChatGPT prompt or something in the company, and they're kind of feeding data and summarizing and trying to work through the prompts on their own. This is kind of the base level. And a lot of organizations have, at least at this point internally, have ways to have some amount of kind of that dashboard AI and maybe a company internally approved method for this sort of prompt engineering, chat GPT sort of approach. And what we find is with these sort of methods, you can save a lot of time. The accuracy, one of the ways that we think about it is there is the side of it which is how good is it at understanding all the data. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actually looking at the information and how well is it finding what the aha moments are, what the so whats are. And I kind of put it on a scale of an analyst. I think about if you were a junior analyst, and people look at the same information, you were a junior analyst versus a senior analyst, what would you pull out of the information? That's a good rule of thumb that I think about to judge the quality of it. The time saved is how much across the process. Report is a reporting manual. So it's one thing to say, we understand this about our strategy, but if someone still has to step back, create a PowerPoint, edit the fonts, cut and paste all the charts in there, and all of that sort of thing, that's very manual, that brute force sort of labor that the last discussion was talking about, which isn't great. And then how well does it handle those different data sources? The more junior things here tend to handle data sources one at a time. The more advanced systems kind of handle it all together. So I want to talk about the insight quality piece because I think that's a good indicator of kind of how AI is advancing. So when we started with our models, we fed basically our engine a set of data about the market and asked it to come out with what does it mean. And initially, what we got was very junior level information. So it's looked at all this information. It's realizing that HCPs are unaware at a high level. It has a really insightful next step of implement an educational program. Not all that useful. It might be a good summary, but it's not useful. It's not pragmatic. And then as you begin to AI matures, you start to get a little more insightful. So maybe the system can break out specialties and segments. Maybe the system can understand underlying themes of a brand strategy and talk about what's happening within those underlying themes. And maybe the system will be a bit more specific when it's suggesting something that you may want to do, a bit more specific on what you might think about. Now, what I will say in the real world, a human is going to read this and have an opinion on it, but again, think of this as a time saver. And then as we kept refining our models and refining our models and understanding things better and better, the outputs get better and better as well. So in this particular case, at this top level, you can see the system understands subtypes, not just specialties, but subtypes of the disease. It understands regionality. So when it's making recommendations about things that we might want to try, it's understanding the difference of what might be recommended in different regions. It is handling more data together so that it's easier to kind of see what's happening. And behind all of these systems, what we find is it's really helpful anytime the system is making a recommendation or suggesting an action or saying, here's a takeaway or an insight, to be able to click and see all the kind of the data that supports that conclusion. So a human being can say, it's great that the system, HAL 2000 or whatever, right, said this is what we should be thinking about, but being able to actually go back and look. I think of it as akin to changing a lot of our jobs from writing the article in the newspaper to editing, being the editor in the newspaper, and using our expertise to be a great editor. From that standpoint is the way to think about it. So these models kind of go over time, and they get better and better, and I think that's a good way to think about how effective and how reliable they are. And this has just been a few short years for that sort of traverse. So an example of a case study here, client we work with entered, for them, it was an existing therapeutic area, but it was an area where there had not been any novel therapies in quite a long time. And so they'd kind of lost touch with the community. And they had a normal kind of brand plan. They used tools to understand and create segments. They create influence mapping across their assumed customer sets. They implemented this sort of more real-time market awareness because it was launch stage, and they wanted to know very quickly what's happening, what was not. And they found really interesting things that altered their thinking quickly. So one of them was in their initial kind of plan, they knew who they thought the primary prescribers were going to be. But they had kind of a set of secondary potential prescribers that they weren't quite sure. One of them was psychiatrists. So this therapy treats a condition, it's pediatric, treats a condition that is potentially creates depression and so forth. And they were focused on the actual specialists and GPs on the condition itself, but didn't really know how much the mental health side would factor into the decision making, and it actually was quite high. And as they began to see that, they were able to then quickly reanalyze all the data sets they had access to, repivot their strategy, and kind of rethink through all of this sort of information to understand the market is a bit different, that if we're going to win in this market, our definition of customer and the weight we're putting against different customer types needs to change a bit. If they had relied on an ATU study, every 6 months or something like that to understand those sorts of things, that would have really been too late for their trajectory. So they use these sorts of tools not as their primary way that they were thinking about strategy and running the business, but it was certainly something that allowed them to very quickly validate things that they were seeing and hearing. The other thing I wanted to just bring up too is there was discussion earlier about content creation and AI. Content creation also works internally. So the ability to create, once you understand something in reporting strategy, using these tools to help you more easily and quickly create communications either within your organization or across organization is something that is important as well. I can speak for myself when I have board meetings. The thing I hate the most is slightly changing the font, slightly moving this around, slightly thinking about this, rewording that headline a little bit differently for that board member or that board member drives me insane. It's one of my least favorite parts of my job. Tools can help with this. And so this is an example of, at a market level, market access, HCP alignment, treatment burden. A lot of with what is really good with AI is looking at like reach curves and influence curves and how those are changing, because that's kind of big data analysis. You can do it at kind of a lower level, so you can do it at like one strategic pillar and demonstrate much easier communication to management. And then the other thing too is that I'll mention is it's when you're talking market change, longitudinal market shaping and market change, it's one thing to have great dashboards and data. It's another thing, though, to really make it stick and have a really good story. Something might have happened along the way that was a really exciting outcome or a real exciting achievement or a really exciting pivot, and you can use these AI tools as well to help kind of refine and share those stories. Those stories can be memorable. We call them pocket stories, but they can be really memorable and really, really helpful. So not only can AI help you with, in this context, the analysis of the data and how that relates to strategy, it can also help you with the communication pieces. So hopefully, this will give you a little bit of a real-world example. In this context, AI is increasingly very effective, and we're excited about the future, and hopefully you are too. So that's all. If you want the presentation, I know some people are taking pictures, you can just scan that and it'll be sent to you. But thank you very much.